All right, let's talk about taxes very quickly and not in the depth that it deserves. Reagan came, I guess the income tax was 70 or 80%. Believe it or not, I guess it was in Eisenhower's time when it was about 80%. That was the top rate. Now, when you remember that Rockefeller created in New York State in the 50s an income tax, which at one point went up to, I think, 15%. 80 plus 15 is 95%. It was, and some of the best years of our economy were in the Eisenhower years. So it was, and when Reagan came with his big tax cut, it was astoundingly effective, people thought. And he took the tax rate at the top and brought it down to 28%, okay, which was very good for the state of New York, particularly because we were burdened with the Rockefeller income tax for the state. And then on top of that, if you live in the city, you have the city tax. So the taxes were murder. But the significant thing is, even when they were way up high, that high, it didn't hurt our economy. Now, here's another thing people do not recognize in this country. Reagan was a very big tax cutter, and I liked him. He was a terrific guy. I got to know him well. As a matter of fact, he adopted in his last year a program I proposed to him as chairman of the National Governor's Budget Committee to do another Greenspan Commission, but that's for another time. And he's known as a great tax cutter, but he cut the taxes so deep while he was spending so much on military that the deficit, and in those years we really respected the position against deficits, the deficits got to be so bad that he raised taxes 6 times, and the last time about $100 billion with loophole closings, et cetera, to avoid the deficit. So in the end, it was a wash. He raised taxes as high as he had cut them. He was followed by George Bush I, who was his vice president, who had run against him in the primary and said of the Reagan plan, which was supply side, the theory of supply side is if you take care of the rich people, if you cut their taxes, et cetera, then they'll produce an economy that works so swiftly you'll get all your money back and more. I said, really? That's terrific. I mean, why don't we cut it to 0 and then we'll all be rich? And Bush said about that, that's voodoo economics when he ran against Reagan, but then he became the vice president and he had to go along with the tax cuts. Except when Reagan started increasing the taxes, which he did, Bush shied away, became president, and said, read my lips, I will not raise taxes. But he had to raise taxes. Why? Because the deficit was so high, and that cost him the presidency. And he raised taxes $100 billion. Now that's twice you've raised taxes, 2 Republicans, one after the other, at about $100 billion. That was a lot of money in those days. It isn't now, but it was then. Then what happens? Comes Clinton. Clinton promises Jesse Jackson and me in the March on Washington that he will do $200 billion on job-producing infrastructure if he becomes president. He became president. Bob Rubin became Secretary of the Treasury and said, you can't do what you promised Jesse and Mario. Why? You have to keep doing what Reagan and Bush have done. Raise taxes at the top because the deficit's still a problem. And so Clinton, raises taxes $100 billion. So now you have all those big tax increases, and what did you wind up with? Well, you heard me, I read it to you. A $5.4 trillion surplus, a terrific economy, et cetera. So all these people who tell you, oh, gee, if you're going to tax up there, you're going to lose, they're all going to go to Florida, et cetera, maybe that's true. All I can give you are the facts. Reagan, Bush, Clinton, all raised taxes, okay? So at the very least, what we have to say is this about taxes. Do not be simplistic. Don't think that every tax raising is bad. Every tax cut is good. Sometimes they're good, sometimes. I cut the income tax in the state of New York, more than Carey, more than Pataki, more than anybody, because I thought that had to be done. So I did cut that tax. But I raised a tax on real estate that cost me my governorship, because the real estate industry got together and beat the heck out of me. I only lost by 2.5 points. That's that, and the death penalty didn't help me either. I don't think, being against it. So much on taxes.